I want to start right off the bat with a question that I'm sure you get all the time, and that a lot of parents are thinking about when they can't sleep at night. With AI-ing, what the heck should kids be studying right now?
Yes, good question.
Hey folks, today we're talking AI, kids, and schools. Kristen DiCerbo is Khan Academy's Chief Learning Officer, and this is her second appearance on the show. Last time we heard about the birth of Khanmigo, their AI-powered tutor and teacher's helper. Today we'll hear how they've calibrated Khanmigo, including just how helpful it ought to be.
Because there's this idea of, oh, it's a Socratic tutor, you just keep asking questions in that Socratic way. At some point, the student's going to be like, I don't know, in all capital letters.
We'll talk about the value of struggle. Friction is key to learning, But
on the other hand, we shouldn't fetishize struggle.
Khan Academy was very early to AI, and they've struggled through a lot of things that we now take for granted. So I asked about today's challenges, and Kristen says constantly improving their evals, their evaluations, is critical to keeping tabs on millions of student and teacher interactions. Welcome to Future Around and Find Out, where we celebrate the breakthroughs, call BS on the hype, and explore how things might go sideways and how we, together, can steer the future in the right direction. Hi, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm an independent technologist and former NPR journalist, and on the show, you'll hear sharp takes on what builders need to know now. Learn more, sign up for the newsletter, and ask questions of upcoming guests at futurearound.com. What the heck should kids be studying right now?
Yes, good question. So there's a few different, I think, buckets of things. So first is the question of, do we still need foundational skills? And you hear lots of folks talk about, no, what we need is critical thinking, and we need kids to be able to connect the dots, and we need collaboration. Yes, but you can't think critically about nothing. You need to be able to have some of that foundational understanding to be able to think critically or even creatively about things. So I still believe that kids do need to be studying your basic foundational math. Your reading skills, your writing skills are still important, even in this new world of AI, because otherwise you have no way to be able to do things like check the AI, understand if it's right or not, think about how to work with it to produce things instead of offloading all your thinking. So that's the foundational skills bucket. In my mind, it is still here to stay. Then there's what does AI literacy mean? And how does that work? And so there's a lot of folks who are putting out different frameworks and different ideas. At Khan Academy, we're part of a group called Teach AI that has been working on one of those frameworks and basically tries to lay out what are the knowledge and skills and just ways of thinking that are important in this age of AI. And how do those come together to help us think about how we both use AI, but also create with AI and manage AI? And so if folks are interested in looking at what those kinds of lists might look like, there's an AI literacy framework.org. You can check out some of that we've been working on there. And then the third bucket is the things like critical thinking, collaboration, all of those ideas. And those have always been kind of tough for us to know how to teach. You know, we put kids in groups to do group work, and we just kind of assume that they're going to figure it out, and everyone hates it. And no one is ever able to really do it well. And I think we need to be thinking more about how do we teach those kinds of skills, and can AI actually help us teach them, which is an interesting way for us to maybe lean into AI a little bit as we think about skills we need.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love you to say more about teaching critical thinking, because that does seem to be a really, really important skill right now, to be able to see if you're working with AI and it gives you something, and it's going to give you something that looks really good on the surface. How do you parse and detect if something is right, doesn't smell right? Like, what are you seeing in successful patterns of teaching critical thinking and that key skill of AI literacy?
So what you're describing, it turns out, has been a skill we've been trying to teach with digital literacy and the internet. It's
Yep,
not that
for sure.
different between you click on that site. Is that a good site? Is that giving you good information? What does that look like?
And all the sites now have great fonts and great design. It used to be you could tell because it had
Yes.
crappy design, and
Right.
that's no longer a tell because now everything looks, nice,
It,
nice Georgia fonts, and it looks okay.
exactly. Yes, yeah. And it's the same thing with the AI, right? The writing looks really good and the AI sounds really confident when it's
Hmm.
giving you the answer until you challenge it. And then it's, oh yeah, sorry, I was wrong. And so the key is to help people understand how to cross-check information with different sources, how to think about getting multiple sources, how to identify the sources of the AI. So some of the AI tools now can give you references to what you're doing and reference actual articles and actual like peer-reviewed research articles and to support what they're saying. So it's those same skills of trying to trace back where is this information coming from? Where is this claim coming from? And what is the evidence for this claim? And that's something we've been talking about in critical thinking, but also in like English language arts, the argumentation skills that people do, that idea of understanding evidence from argument. And science courses teach this as well. So this is the idea that we actually can teach these kind of skills across domains and disciplines as students are thinking about applying this idea of how do you evaluate the evidence for an argument. And that's, I think, an important skill for us to be helping students understand.
Yeah. You have a really wide purview. You get to see a lot of schools and how they operate. You get to talk to a lot of teachers and parents and kids. What are you seeing in terms of some successful patterns of how schools are meeting this moment?
I see a lot of schools who are successful are doing things like piloting and trying things out in a small way, and then thinking about how they are going to evaluate whether that's working or not. Like they have some plan for how they're going to figure out what's working and what's not. So that's certainly helpful for students. Second is in schools and teachers who are adopting AI to solve a particular problem. And that problem can't be, oh, we don't have AI. Like if you're
Yeah.
thinking about,
Yeah.
like we are trying to adopt AI to improve our students' math fluency, or we're trying to improve our students' ability and the amount of opportunity and support they have to practice, or whatever that is, that specific problem they're trying to solve. We find those schools end up having a lot more clear usage of the tools instead of just adopting them and they sit on the shelf. And students are a lot more clear about how they're supposed to be using it. Because the other side we get to is when we talk to students and they just tell us, I don't know, from one class to another, there's different rules, or they don't even tell us the rules. I don't know when I'm allowed to use it and not allowed to use it. So that's probably the third thing is just having some clarity for students of what the expectations are and when they should be using it and when they shouldn't and why. So students understand when they are or not, what the thinking is behind that so they can start to make decisions for themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the answer is sort of the opposite of what you just said, but I'm curious if you've seen particularly egregious negative patterns or poor ways to integrate this technology, or frankly other technologies, because I know there's a long history of putting tech in schools, and it's somewhat shiny object syndrome a bit at the time, and I'm curious what you're seeing, particularly around AI, but I know it relates to a much broader trend over many years.
It does. And I know folks are worried that the implementation of AI is going to lead to kids using it all the time and all of the offloading of their thinking, and that is definitely a concern. And if kids are offloading their thinking to an AI, they're not going to learn as much as they would otherwise. And so we see some early research papers showing, yes, if kids are just saying, do this for me, they're not learning. So that's one side. But the other thing that we actually see more of right now, and we see this is the piece that aligns to education technology through the years, is that if in K-12 classrooms in particular, if you have an AI tool you want students to use, the biggest hurdle is actually getting to that use. There was an article called The 5% Problem. which was looking before age of AI at various edtech platforms that have been shown to be effective. And Khan Academy fits in this category. We know if you use Khan Academy 30 minutes a week, you will see greater than expected learning trajectories for your students. But getting to that 30 minutes a week, which is not a lot of time, is actually a big hurdle for students and teachers in classrooms. And so the 5% problem comes from, in our early studies, we were seeing only about 5% of students getting to that 30 minutes a week. And so even in the age of AI, we see with Khanmigo and AI tools, we've gotten Khan Academy up to about average of about 12% now, still not super high. And the same with the AI tools is that it's actually using them in ways that we think can be effective is, we're not seeing a lot of that usage. And it just comes from, there's so many different things to do in classrooms. The average teacher, studies show, has maybe 40 different education technology tools available to them at any time. And so just the amount of different things that they're trying to handle, plus all of the things of just having a classroom full of kids, means just consistent usage is actually the first big hurdle.
Yeah, I see that very acutely with my oldest, who's 13, and just the number, I see it from his perspective, the number of apps he has to manage as a 13-year-old, right?
Yes.
Some of his assignments are in Google Classroom, some are in Power School, some are somewhere else. And I don't know how anyone at that age figures out what they have to do and when they have to do it, when they have to go to so many disparate places. And so I imagine that problem is several X for the teachers who also have to manage it.
Absolutely.
You contributed recently to a scenario planning report called Beyond the AI Inflection Point, and one of the things that struck me is it's not optimistic. It lays out a variety of possible outcomes. What is the best case scenario, and the failure mode? Like, lay out for us, like, what is a great scenario and what is one of the ones that you hope that we avoid?
So part of this group, and we had 2 days where we, just did all of that kind of discussion of what those were. And the folks that organized it then hired a professional writer. It turns out there's still such a thing as professional writers who are very good at doing this kind of craft. And they created this fictional narrative, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure because there are 3 different outcomes that you can select. And it turns out none of them are 100% great and 100% this is amazing. But I think there are elements that I think we should be looking out for and thinking through. So I think the first existential threat to learning is the cognitive offloading. If students are not doing the thinking and they're offloading all their thinking to the AI, they are not going to learn. And so there's a big piece around how do we ensure that students are still doing the important work they need to do to learn in a classroom? So that's somewhat controllable if you're in a K-12 classroom environment, but as soon as kids are out of the classroom, they have access to all these tools. And what does that look like? So it's not just a matter of don't do this. It's a matter of helping them build their own AI literacy and understanding why learning is important and creating a culture of learning and creating this idea of, why is it important to learn these things, so that they understand why that friction that's not always fun is important. So that's the first thing, is thinking about how we get students to do the work that's needed for learning. The second piece that people talk a lot about is, does school need to look different than it does now? And there have been technologists trying to disrupt schools for a long time. Justin Reich at MIT wrote a book called Failure to Disrupt that chronicles a lot of this. And schools are very resistant to that kind of systems level change. And for good reason. We don't want schools just swinging back and forth with the latest fad and doing things. But it means that any kind of change, for instance, in scheduling or even grading, is really difficult to make. And so any big change is relatively unlikely, just because it's such a resistant system to that kind of change. So
humans, the resistance isn't their humans.
Yes.
That's a big part of it, I know.
Yes, absolutely.
We love change. We famously love change.
Famously, yes. We can have all the change. So I think that's a piece of it. And then there's lots of things around AI in terms of, and one of the key events in this fictional narrative comes around, a big incident with deep fakes, and thinking about a deep fake is made of the principal of the school and saying terrible things. And like those kinds of incidents, when we think about what schools are dealing with, they're not just dealing with the learning side, they're also having to deal with this whole social side of it and the threats that we have from all of the things that AI can do now in terms of misinformation and spreading all of that. So I think that's the other real threat in terms of where things are. I think the promises are that students need some level of individual support and some level of individual feedback that is really hard for one teacher to give, and this technology can potentially help with that. And I think it also opens up the possibilities of being able to address some of those skills we hadn't before. So briefly, we're talking about collaboration. The University of Colorado has an interesting tool that they're researching and kind of building that sits in the middle of a group of students who are collaborating and can listen in and then give coaching about collaboration skills to the students. Like, Kristen, you're talking too much. Shush. Dan, you might want to answer, explore that question. That was, that was something you researched. Take a look at that. So being able to think about, providing feedback on some of those skills, lots of new things we can do that we're just thinking of, I think.
The scenario report mentions one outcome. It's not painted as a good one, which is that AI is not sort of taught in schools, or it's sort of, and it goes underground. Kids are using it anyway, like you just said. Is that, where are we on that scenario? Do you have a sense of like how actively schools are engaging with AI?
So we've certainly seen, as with any technology, a group of early adopters, and then we're, in the past year or so, we've seen more schools moving in and doing things. But actually, I don't think the potential for moving in that direction is from the schools. I think it's from policy. So we have seen the phone bans that have been happening, and that's, probably reasonable. But there is a lot of chatter in policy circles about screen bans. And thinking about, pulling screens out of the classroom and out of schools and all of that. And I think that is going to throw the good out with, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's taking, a very broad brush to anything screen related, as opposed to thinking, what are the tools that are helpful for learning and what are the tools that are not? And let's be cautious about that. But I think we've seen draft bills in various states that are potentially thinking about significantly cutting back on screen time, which I would then have the knock-on effect of, kids would not get to work on these tools. And as I think we've all seen in the workplace, these tools are here. And so if we are not giving kids the opportunities to understand how to use them and use them responsibly, we're doing a disservice.
I mean, maybe we should make all schools trade schools, though, while we're at it, right? I mean, is that the only profession going forward? I mean, I'm being somewhat flip, but I'm also not. Like, carpentry, plumbing, being an electrician, like these are seemingly skills of the future. The very first question I asked you was like, what's keeping parents up at night? What's making them anxious? It's that we don't know what to train kids for right now. It feels uncertain, right?
Yeah.
And I've had people come to my house. I've got 3 boys in this house. I've had plumbers come to my house and they look at the 3 kids and they're like, teach them a trade. Like, there's not enough of us. Like, we're drowning in work. Like, please, like, we need more people. I mean, I'm just curious what you see as, to speak to that anxiety and like what we should be ultimately training for or teaching for.
We're in a place of a lot of uncertainty right now. I don't have the clear answers of what are those jobs going to be in 5 years. I mean, 5 years ago would never have expected the AI to be at the place it is now. And so thinking about where it's going to be in 5 years, I don't know. I think the biggest things, and this sounds flip, but is teaching kids how to learn and learn new skills and learn new things. And that way they can adapt as things change to picking up new skills, picking up what they, oh, here's how you learn a new skill or a new, whether that be a kind of a white collar skill or a blue collar skill. It's unknown what's going to be in the future. And so if you know how to learn new things, that's going to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a graduate of a liberal arts college, so this is
Same.
this is stuff that I believed anyway. Yeah, I don't. It's somewhat gratifying to that's not a knock anymore to work in tech. What should parents be demanding right now of their schools, or demanding is a strong word, but what kind of questions should they be asking of their schools in regards to how technology broadly, AI specifically, is taught, is integrated?
Yes. So I think they should be asking, is there an AI policy? What is the AI policy? How did it come to be? And then in terms of, using tech in the classrooms, I think the big questions are, what are you using tech to do? What is the tech accomplishing? And how do we think about using a small set of technology tools thoughtfully as opposed to piling them on? So, those are the questions of like, what are the tools that you have and what are you using them for? And then how do you know if they're working is a good question to ask.
What about at home? What are some ways that parents can help their kids? Like, what does good look like at home in terms of teaching some of these skills or using some of these new technologies?
Yes. So this is an ongoing, how do we manage screen time? All of those questions are big. Make sure your kids can get out and see the sky sometimes. Make sure they're, doing physically getting off the couch. All of those are important things. There's also an author, Elizabeth Howe, HAU, who has put out a book and is talking a lot about relational intelligence being the next important intelligence and how we build and form relationships and all of that. So I think all of that is really important as a parent to make sure that that's happening. And then as you start thinking about what's going on screens, I love the models of working on things together and collaborating, whatever that may be, with the things that are going on the screen. So it's the parent, the kid, and the screen together and thinking about what that may be, whether that's playing games online or whether that's working on things like, we have this craft a story where the AI does a couple sentences of a story and then the kid does, but we see a lot of parents and kids doing that together where they're crafting this story with the AI together. And I think those kinds of things where you can think about creating things together are important too. So it's also the creative and thinking about how to use these tools to build and create together that I think is important.
I want to get to Khan Academy. You've just embarked on something equal parts fun and terrifying. You've done a major overhaul of Khan Academy for classroom. And in reading about the new version of the platform, I think I'd noticed two big trends. One, it is a lot more fun. And two, there's AI is much more integrated. What is it that you've tried to do with this new version of Khanmigo for classrooms?
Yes. So this is a bit of a reaction to anyone who builds platforms probably knows what happens when your platform is like 10, 11 years old, 12 years old. You've
perfectly pruned. Everything fits together nicely.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
No, it's bolted on things, features on features on features. Your users are telling you, I can't find that. I didn't even know you had that feature because it's buried so many clicks down and we can't figure out where it is and how to get to anything. We internally, we're affectionately calling it the Winchester Mystery House, for your listeners who know, which is a big house in the Bay Area that was built on so many times you'd end up with hallways that went nowhere. And go visit it sometime if you're out in the Bay Area. And so we're getting this feedback from our users. We could see it when we went into classrooms. And part of the switch was, when Sal initially founded Khan Academy, it was very much just, I'm making videos in my closet. And we were focused on independent learners. And in 2018 to 2019, we launched into classrooms. And so then we had a platform that was trying to work for independent learners and teachers and students in classrooms. And that also created a conflict. So we said, all right, we're going to take this on now and create an experience that is for teachers and students in classrooms and focused on what they need. We'll still have the independent learner platform for independent learners. But in this new one, it's optimized for teachers, making assignments, being able to track progress, students having a very clear view of what they're supposed to do next. And because we had this Khanmigo, who initially was kind of a, stand next to you chatbot, instead we are integrating that further. One place you can really see that is our writing coach, where the AI is really integrated into the essay writing experience as opposed to just being the pop-up that comes next to it. So students don't have to do as much of their thinking about, oh, do I need to open Khanmigo now? Should I ask Khanmigo? Khanmigo will just be there for them.
And how is the experience personalized? Because I know personalized learning has been sort of a holy grail of education technology for I guess for decades now. I don't know. Are we there yet? How is it realized right now?
Yes. And so I'll also say this is another one of those words that comes to mean a million things and no one's really sure what it means. So I like to be clear that you can personalize, for instance, based on the student's current levels of achievement. You can personalize pace, or you can personalize interests. Lots of different ways to personalize. We do some of them and on purpose don't do others. So I'll get into that in a minute. But the biggest thing we do is personalize based on, for instance, what level you're at. So if you work on skills on Khan Academy, you move up levels on each skill you work on, from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered. As you get more questions right, you move up those skills. So now when we have Khanmigo, we can insert into the prompt that we give Khanmigo what level you are at on that skill you're working on. So Khanmigo knows, hey, this person is just attempting this skill for the first time. They're probably going to need more support and more help. Oh, this student is already a proficient. They're trying to get to mastered. Don't give them as much help because they've already got a lot of this and may just, be needing to tweak a little bit about what they're doing and try a little more practice, and they'll get there. So that kind of personalization gets to the idea of personalizing the amount of support and the kind of feedback that students get from Khanmigo. Interestingly, on the other side of thinking about student interests, there's lots of, if we could make it so that all the students' problems were about soccer, or all the students' problems were about this thing they're interested in, they would really be engaged more. And we initially had a feature where students could have a conversation with Khanmigo about their interests, and Khanmigo would store up to 10 interests and then be able to feed them back into the students' conversations. We actually did not find that students had any more lengthy interactions with Khanmigo when it was about their interests. We didn't find that it impacted their, getting the questions right more often or any of that. And so we're a little bit hesitant on the, personalize this to their interests and where they are. Also because when you're 10 or 11 or 12, some of the benefit of education is finding out about new things that you might not even know you're interested yet. And so that's, I think, something we want to encourage, as particularly if you're thinking about, middle schoolers.
Yeah. I mean, and the other area that, we're almost not even mentioning this form of personalization, which is Khanmigo is coaching you on an essay that you have just written. I mean, this is just now, it's almost like we're so used to this now, or at least I am, because I'm using some AI tools when I ask it more to edit my writing. I almost never ask it to write stuff, but I will ask for critique. But that is a form of personalization. It is taking what I just wrote, seconds ago. Khanmigo's been out in market for, I think, a little more than 2 years now. What have you learned from how it's been used, and how have you evolved the product over time?
Yes, so we are in mid-March, we'll be at 3 years, which is crazy for Khanmigo. So a couple of things. One is we've learned, for example, that students are not that great at asking questions. And when I say this to groups of teachers, they say, yes, no kidding. They're not great at asking us good questions either. But it's actually a skill to understand what you know and don't know, and then be able to translate that into a question to ask. And so that's part of really metacognition, is what educational psychologists call it, thinking about your own thinking. And students are not great at that, which means when we look at those transcripts of interactions with students, I can pull out some that are amazing and we're like, oh, this is just what we want to happen. But there's more than we'd like that are not. And so one of the things that we did was put in, based on the conversation, some suggested questions that students can ask. So they can click on the question instead of generating it themselves. The idea being that kind of models what good question asking looks like and helps them both get the answers they need, but also maybe learn to ask better questions themselves.
What's an example of a good question?
So I understand why the mass is part of this equation, but why is acceleration part of this equation? Like thinking about, showing they've kind of thought about what they know and what they don't know and where that is. Interestingly, we had a science teacher who we were visiting their class, and she had done an exercise where she had the students all generate lots of different kind of science questions, often about this. We were talking about evidence from argument, often about what evidence supports this argument and how would I think about which evidence is good and not. Anyway, she had her kids make a bunch of question stems and generate them, and they voted on them and picked the best ones. And then she wrote them on 3x5 cards and taped them to their desk. And so she ended up with kids using these, very cutting edge AI tools, also with paper taped to their desk to tell them how to give them guidance about how to use it. So it was a fun juxtaposition of some traditional methods and some new things. The other really tricky problem that we have not solved but are trying is the figuring out when to give students support and when to keep asking them questions. Because there's this idea of, oh, it's a Socratic tutor, you just keep asking questions in that Socratic way. At some point, the student's going to be like, I don't know, in all capital letters, and just X out of the whole thing and leave the whole system. So it's figuring out, where is that line where you're encouraging them to think, but you're also giving them support.
I've seen the same thing when I've had sort of back and forth with AI, and I'm asking it to critique something. And there was an early version of ChatGPT that would go forever. It would never stop, and you'd have to tell it, okay, shut up, okay, I'm done. Like this is the final version. I'm finding now I'm more using Claude these days, but it was very direct, like shockingly direct sometimes. It's like stop, like you've. And there's a funny balance that I imagine you face the same thing of like tone of voice and like you said, like do we keep encouraging, do we go on, do we correct? Like how I'd love actually another example of how you've navigated that or figured out what the right tone is or how you get it to deliver the results that you want.
Yeah. So tone is interesting because one of the things that, Sal's videos are so popular for is that he sounds like your older cousin helping you with something. He's very approachable, very friendly. So we wanted that to be the tone that.
Hence the name Khanmigo.
Hence the name Khanmigo. And so that's great, but it also means that we were finding that sometimes it would be saying, great job, when it wasn't a great job. And it's actually, the student should have, need some feedback that they are on the wrong track and this is not the right way to go and what that looks like. And interestingly, Sal was reading some transcripts and said, if I were sitting next to this kid, I would be giving him a little bit of tough love and saying like, hey, come on now, focus on this. And Khanmigo does not do that kind of tone, and getting it to even get close to that would be a huge uphill battle. But what we have done is a lot more around making sure that it's at least being able to tell students they're not on the right track when they're not on the right track. And being able to get at least to that level.
Does Khanmigo speak in the first person? Like, I'm going to help you with this, or let's do this together. Does it? I mean, I'm curious how you navigate that as well, because we want to create products that are engaging. Verb tenses like let's and us and we, like that's the way we talk. But also, like, it's not a sentient being. There's questions of whether it someday will be, or some people believe it will. I just interviewed someone who believes we're on that path. But I'm curious, like, how you navigate that kids don't mistake it for something that it's not.
Oh, you've just uncovered a whole other rabbit hole we can go down. Yes. So we gave it the name Khanmigo because we didn't want to give it a human name. We wanted it to be
Okay.
something that didn't have that name. We call it because we don't want it, it's just a thing. It's not, it doesn't have human characteristics. But it does speak in the first person. It does say let's and us. And
Kind of awkward not to.
it really is.
It's really hard not to. Yeah.
It is. And there's a lot of talk about whether, a good part of human tutoring is the relationship you have with your tutor. And if we don't have that, are we actually making it so it's not going to be a successful tutor? Or can it do a lot of the functions of tutoring without having that relationship and what that looks like? That is a big open question. And so we think we're getting, good results here, but we are holding that line between, so it doesn't seem like it knows you too much. But that idea, it does have some memory of your previous conversations because we want it to know, hey, did you struggle with fractions yesterday? Maybe you need some more help on fractions today, which again makes it start to feel like it knows you. And where that line is very blurry. But given that we've seen the real dangers of students having relationships with some of these AI tools, we are certainly very far from that with Khanmigo, but is something that we talk about all the time of how much should it be acting like a human tutor would in terms of that relationship building.
Yeah. I want to back up for just a quick second because you've taken probably many models at this point, I'm guessing, and built Khanmigo. How does it differ from if I just open up ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and start using it as a tutor? Like, what are the confines that Khanmigo gives me that I don't get out of the box?
A lot. And it's really important that we think about tools that are built for purpose in this phase of AI versus the general foundational tools. So the big pieces that are going on as a student interacts with Khanmigo, what's happening under the hood is we're sending, of course, whatever the student says, I'm stuck or whatever. And then there is a prompt that tells the model how to act like a math tutor or a writing coach or whatever that is. And that prompt brings in a whole bunch of research about what tutors do and don't do and lays that out. When the student's working together on a problem on Khan Academy, we also give it the problem they're working on, the answer to that problem, because it's a problem we wrote and we know the answer to, and then a whole, usually the hint structure, which is kind of the worked step-by-step example, because that's how, we give hints on Khan Academy. And so all of that goes along with it to the model. You're right. We have many models, and right now we're working with both OpenAI and Google and use different models for different purposes, depending on which ones work better. And so all of that goes in. So it's going to have some sense of what kinds of support to provide, when to provide it. All of that stuff that we've been talking about is in that prompt. And ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude are not going to do those things out of the gate and just in their models. The other things we have are a bunch of safeguards built into the system. For instance, every interaction goes through a moderation tool that's looking for instances of violence or hate or self-harm, which is actually the one we've seen and flagged more of, sexual content, et cetera. And when those get flagged, that sends an email to the parent or teacher, depending if it's a parent or a teacher account, and they get a notification and can see what that was and be able to intervene. We also have our own community support team that's reviewing those and can reach out to schools if they are seeing something that's concerning. So there's that piece. And then teachers and parents actually can just see the full chats that students do or summarize them and be able to get a sense of, for them, it doesn't have to be something concerning, but it could just be, what are the misconceptions this student's showing? Or overall in my class, what are the skills that students are struggling the most with? Like those kinds of interactions, because again, it's built for education as opposed to being built for general purpose.
AI can very quickly give you an answer, and it can skip the productive struggle. And I'm interested in how you figure out how much to make people struggle, basically. Because correct me if I'm wrong, that sort of is where the learning really sticks.
Yes. So I was just doing a bunch of refreshing my own knowledge on this literature. And it's funny, there's something called productive struggle, productive failure, impasse-driven learning. There's about 4 different names for this idea, but it's exactly what you're saying. This idea of it is in the friction in learning something where an important part of that learning happens. But on the other hand, we shouldn't fetishize struggle and everything needs to be a struggle. And oh my gosh, where that is. I was talking to someone who remembers back in the day when we had computer punch cards and they were like, it was such a struggle. And it had nothing to do with me learning how to program.
Right.
It was just the struggle. And so we need to make sure the struggle is germane to the learning that we're trying to get the student to do. But it comes back to that idea of knowing where the student is on their journey of learning. And so are you just learning something new? Are you reviewing it? And where does that struggle happen? And in math, there's actually an active debate among math educators about how much struggle and when in math should students get. And there's one camp who says they should be struggling up front with something, and that is what they call preparation for future learning, because they understand what the struggle is, and then they can get to where it is. There's another group that says we should not be making students have to rediscover every principle of math. We should teach them the principle, give them the opportunity, and then give them succeedingly more complex problems to struggle with once they have the tools in the toolkit that they need to be able to engage in that struggle. So it is an unsolved question, and the debates can get pretty hot in the math education world. So for those listening who are not in that world, it's an open question. I will say at Khan Academy, we tend to lean towards giving the students the skills they need, building up their fluency in the foundational skills, and then moving to more complex questions and activities that require multiple skills coming together.
Tell me about the productive struggle at Khan Academy on the product and engineering team as you figured out how to work well with AI. The last time that we spoke, it was not long after the big ChatGPT moment, not long after Khanmigo had just come out. And you told me about some things like the prompt library you created and prompt chaining and sort of teaching it this chain of thought, this like reasoning, which is like totally old hat now. And I don't even know if those techniques are really relevant because I think they're sort of baked into the models at this point. What are you doing today that, maybe we'll look back in 2 years, oh, that's old hat. Like what's working well for you right now?
It turns out one of our big struggles was evaluation. And like, how do you know what's coming out of the models and is it the right thing to come out of the models? And if you have, 1 million students and teachers on your platform, you can't go in and manually review all those transcripts and see what's happening. And so we created from scratch a prompt engineering team. I learned the term evaluation harness, which is basically a tool so you can swap a model in. Google comes out with their new model, we can put it in here and run a bunch of tests on it and see how it does on tests related to student tutoring and all of that. And then pull it out and see, put another one in. And then though, we have to create, what are these evaluations we want to do? One of the interesting things we did was we wanted to think about whether students were doing this kind of deeper thinking. And we said, how can we do this? It turns out there's a framework from a researcher at Arizona State named Mickey Chi called ICAP. And basically backwards, if you go from passive learning to active, to constructive, to interactive, your learning is going to increase. So passive learning is, just kind of like taking things in. Active is at least interacting, doing something. Constructive is really producing a response or a question like we were talking about. And so we had some humans go through to see if we could label conversations about whether students were actively or passively interacting. And we got them to agree at a pretty good level. And then we created an LLM as a judge and trained the LLM really through prompting. We're not doing fine tuning. To label conversations as active, passive, constructive, et cetera, and got that to agree at the same with the humans at the same level they agree with each other. And so then we can create an ongoing, we sample about 20,000 interactions a day and label them and are able to see, our students interacting more. And then if we change something about a prompt for a particular activity, we can see its impact, and we can use that as a dependent variable to see if it's impacting students' active and constructive engagement on the site and what they're doing. So we have a bunch of dashboards now that I can look at every day and track all of these different things about the behavior of Khanmigo and what it's doing. I never would have imagined, 3 years ago, that how much time and effort we would spend creating these different judges and ways to evaluate new models and just being able to understand the output that comes out of them when there's so much text coming out every day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, evals are really, really important. Well, I'd love to end on a high note. What is something that you're optimistic about in terms of where we're going from here?
I'm most optimistic about the fact that we have so many people who really care about kids in schools and their learning. And so if we can all work together to think about the most important thing being, how do we help kids learn? I think that we can figure out how to use AI, figure out how to use the next tools. If we keep focusing on how do students learn and how do we get more students to learn more.
Awesome. Kristen, thank you. I really, really enjoyed speaking with you again.
Thank you for having me.
This is Future Around and Find Out, and I am so excited to keep exploring with you, to keep steering the future in the right direction. Go to futurearound.com to get the newsletter, to ask questions of upcoming guests, and to find more ways that we can build a better future together.